Hey guys, back with another video, another movie-related video this time. And I was thinking of doing one similar to a gaming video I did a while ago, like games I like that everyone else dislikes, games I dislike that everyone else likes. And I thought I'd do that with movies, but the more I was thinking about it, I did a guilty pleasure movies video, and that's kind of like one of those topics. So I thought I'd just change things around and do kind of a movies I find to be overrated, and then after this video, I'll do an underrated movies video. Now, this video, I'm gonna try to not talk too long about each of these movies because, as much as I love movies, I feel like honestly there are a lot of overrated movies out there, at least in my opinion. Especially this past, like I'd say, this past decade has there's been so many movies that are just, in my opinion, just incredibly overrated. Um, and I feel like movies in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were just much better. Not to say there aren't great movies coming out, but I just find myself just not as interested in a lot of movies, especially now because, well, I guess I'll get this out of the way. Like, comic book movies in general, I find to be extremely overrated, and I'm so sick of them. And it feels like that's all that comes out these days. It's kind of depressing. You really have to look hard for some of the really interesting, unique movies out there. But so yeah, a bit of a negative video this first one, but just movies I find to be overrated that everyone seems to love. Let's get right into things with The King's Speech. This is one of those movies where there's a lot of movies like this where they are just pure Oscar bait. The kind of movie that is just made to win awards. A period piece. I forget when this takes place, but a period piece where the main character has to overcome a problem. It's well acted. British actors. It's just one of those movies that's everything is almost specifically designed to win awards. And it's not a terrible movie, but it's one of those movies that I can't stand. And every time I see them, it drives me a bit nuts. And there's a bunch of movies I'd lump into this category. I'll mention four here that I'm not going to put a picture up for these ones, but The English Patient, Dances with Wolves, Forrest Gump, and Crash. Four movies that Forrest Gump that's kind of a guilty pleasure for me, but all four of these movies won, I think, the Best Picture award. And in each of those years, there was a far better movie. With The English Patient, you had Fargo, which is a fucking masterpiece, and that should easily won. Dances with Wolves beat out Goodfellas, like, absolutely insane. Forrest Gump beat out Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction, absolutely insane. And Crash beat out, I can't remember what it beat out, but that's another super overrated movie. That's like, the dialogue is so heavy-handed and just ridiculous. It tackles some important issues, for sure, but I think that movie's just way like condescending and just heavy-handed. Dances with Wolves is probably my least favorite of those. English Patient I really hate too, but again, the King's Speech, the King's Speech and other movies like it, the Oscar bait movie. I always find these overrated. There's almost never a case where there's this Oscar bait movie that comes around there. I'm just like, oh, that was surprisingly good. I always find them overrated. Next up, we have Bridesmaids. Now, I was thinking of comedies because honestly, comedies aren't my favorite genre. I'll admit, it's very rarely I find a comedy movie to be really funny. And to me, a comedy movie has to be consistent. It has to be like pretty much nonstop laughs. And I find a lot of comedies are like have a few moments that are funny, and then the rest of the movie is just not funny. And admittedly, I don't find much to be funny. In fact, if I was to think of comedy movies, there's only two, and they're both very similar to each other, that made me laugh the entire time, and that was Borat and Bruno, which I know those movies are, they get a mixed response. I know some people really hate them, and that style of humor is not going to be for everyone, but for me, it hit all the boxes, and it was, like, Borat especially, like, that's my favorite comedy of all time. But Bridesmaids, now, I admit, maybe I'm not the target audience, although, from what I've heard, both men and women love this movie and think it's really funny. I don't think I laughed once. Like, I don't know. With a comedy movie, again, I guess it's kind of subjective, but I just did not find it funny. And a lot of comedy movies I find kind of overrated. The Hangover, like people loved that one. I didn't think that was that funny. There's a couple funny scenes. American Pie and like every teenage comedy I just can't stand. Uh, there's a lot of comedies I found overrated. I like Anchorman. Anchorman's a fairly good comedy. Anchorman 2, on the other hand, no, not definitely not. There's a lot of bad comedies out there. Another overrated one is like Animal House. I know that was huge back in the day, and people think it holds up really well. I didn't find that movie funny at all. Um, so yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of comedy movies I find overrated for sure. Next up, we have Army of Darkness. Now, I'm probably going to get some shit for this one. I don't get it. I don't get what people see in this movie. Now, Evil Dead, I liked. It was, it's a fairly basic, low budget horror movie. Evil Dead 2, I think, got a perfect mix of humor and horror, although I still kind of find that movie a tad overrated. But Army of Darkness, like, for one, this movie is so tame. I think it's actually rated R, but it feels like a PG-13 horror movie. The action is so boring, and there's so much of it. There's barely any comedy in this movie, and the comedy that is here is just not funny. Like like all the quips and it doesn't have like the quotes, the funny quotes that like Evil Dead 2 had. I think there is like a few memorable ones that people always spout off, but like I don't know, man. I don't get this movie when it's so boring. I was kind of surprised because I had seen Evil Dead 1 and 2, and when I finally got around to seeing this, I was kind of excited after hearing all the praise for it, and I was just like, oh man, like what a disappointment. I don't know. I really don't get Army of Darkness. I know it has its fans, but I'm sorry. I don't know, man. It did not hook me at all. The next movie is Silver Linings Playbook, a highly praised movie from a few years ago. And again, I watched this and I was confused. Basically, it's one of the most like formulaic movies I've ever seen, where you get these two beautiful, attractive people, give them a mental illness, have a romantic relationship between the two of them, have it work out perfectly in the end with an absolutely bullshit Hollywood ending, and then the audience just completely cheers and eats it all up. This kind of movie just really drives me nuts, and obviously there are probably going to be people that disagree with me, but I don't know. I felt that the movie just really was manipulative. I don't know. It really rubbed me the wrong way. And it like the performances were generally good. I didn't find the movie funny, that's for sure. But the whole time I was watching it, it felt so safe and predictable, and like quirky, like trying to be as quirky as possible. It's one of those kind of movies that there's a lot of movies like this. Garden State, I'll kind of actually throw into the same kind of category. Although I do think that movie is actually better. Although again, that's another movie I feel is kind of overrated. But Silver Linings Playbook, I don't know. I really did not enjoy it, and the high praise for it is really baffling to me. All right, the next movie is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Now, this is actually considered a masterpiece, and I absolutely hate it. Now, there's a reason why I can't get into this movie, and I think I can understand why people like it, kind of. For one, I thought the story was incredibly boring. I know people really got into the story with this movie. I found it. I just did not get into the story. But I think the main thing with this movie is the martial arts in it. It's fantasy martial arts. I think there's like a name for it, but the character, like people are like flying and floating all over the place. The action is very over the top. The whole movie is just very over the top and melodramatic in general. And I just could not do it. I just can't get into things like that. And it's just the fighting just completely took me out of it. It was so over the top that it was extremely off-putting to me, and it was just so ridiculous that I couldn't get into the movie. And eventually, like halfway through the movie, I was actually getting angry watching it, which I know is, I don't know. I feel like I'm the only one that really can't get into this movie because I look at all the praise and I wish I enjoyed the movie, but I couldn't stand it. It's just not my thing. The type of martial arts in this movie, and just the fantasy element to it was just too much for me, unfortunately. So yeah, another one of those movies that I don't know. I just cannot. It's hard for me to see the praise. That said, like again, it's something I'm not really into. Though Ang Lee, the director, I kind of find him to be overrated. I don't think I've really loved any of his movies. Probably my favorite of his was The Ice Storm, but even then I thought that was kind of overrated. Recently he did what, Life of Pi. I hated that movie. I absolutely could not stand that movie. But there again, there's another overrated movie. He did The Hulk, which was dreadful. Like, I don't know. I really don't get why people think he's like one of the greatest living directors. I really don't understand it. But yeah, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Next up is Lincoln. This movie came out not too long ago, and man, I actually kind of find Steven Spielberg movies to be overrated in general. We'll talk about that, but this movie was so fucking boring. It was so dry. There was no like, I know it does it, the story itself is not the most, exciting story ever, and obviously it's a very, this is a very important film, and Daniel Day-Lewis, I have to mention, yes, he knocks it out of the park. His performance is incredible, but everything else about this movie is so dry. The dialogue has no, like, there's just no humor to this movie whatsoever. It is so, like, I think you can make a biopic type film like this interesting and exciting, and I feel like Spielberg wasn't able to pull it off. I don't know. I guess a lot of the critics and people that watched this movie absolutely loved it. I was so bored, and of course I had known about pretty much everything that happens in the movie basically, and from what I believe there is actually some historical inaccuracies with this movie too, but I don't know. Maybe it's because, like, political type political movies have never really been. Uh, I haven't really been too interested in those types of movies, but I don't know. This one just completely bored me. It's one of those movies. And talking about Steven Spielberg for a second, obviously he's made some classic movies. Jaws is a great movie. The Indiana Jones movies are really good, but I feel he makes these really entertaining popcorn movies. But there's only two movies I've ever seen from him that I would actually call genuine masterpieces, and those are Schindler's List and Munich. Munich being a very underrated movie. Schindler's List being an amazing movie that I would never want to watch again because it's extremely depressing. But I don't know, Lincoln just didn't quite gel with me. And honestly, lately I think he's even though Lincoln actually probably is one of his better movies in a while, like War of the Worlds, I really didn't like. The newest Indiana Jones, what was it? Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That movie was fucking terrible. Like, I don't know. He's constantly considered one of the best directors of all time, and he's made some really fun, entertaining popcorn action movies that have made a ton of money. But I don't know. I just don't think he's made too many masterpieces. Like, I don't think he's near up to the level of like Scorsese or Kubrick or anything like that. But I don't know. Spielberg in general, I feel, is kind of overrated, and Lincoln was just one of those movies that I don't know. I didn't quite get the praise. The next one is Videodrome, which was actually kind of a bummer to me because David Cronenberg, I pretty much love all of his movies. And so I was really excited to see this because this is generally considered one of his best and most highly praised. And it started off really strong. It started off really interesting and it has like a certain atmosphere to it that's just really creepy. And then it gets really silly really quickly. And then by the end, I was just, I was almost, I was pretty much angered with the movie. Like, it was just, I don't know, like the second half of this movie is just convoluted, absolutely ridiculous, and just constantly trying to shock you with like disturbing imagery. And admittedly, the effects in this movie are really gruesome and still gruesome to this day. And the atmosphere still kind of persists throughout the movie. I think it just gets too much towards the end, which is a shame because I think this movie could have been like amazing, and I guess a lot of people really do love it. I can kind of maybe see where, especially when you probably start to think of all like these theories and things like that. It is probably one of those movies that a lot of people just watch over and over and get really into it and write essays and stuff on it. But I don't know. I thought it got to be just way too much in the second half, unfortunately. But yeah, the concept itself from in the beginning was really interesting. I wish they did something differently with it than where they go, because this movie's just fucking weird and batshit insane. That said, even though I do kind of find it to be overrated, I would still actually recommend seeing it. And then definitely check out Cronenberg's other stuff like Scanners. Scanners is a great movie. I love that movie. But yeah, Videodrome. I don't know. I just really didn't care for it. Next movie is Her, which came out not too long ago, as like some of these other movies. Again, like I said in the beginning, a lot of these are like very recent movies. I find them overrated. I don't know. It's very recently that I've just seen so many movies that just get so much praise, and I'm not into them. And this movie, I actually genuinely hate this movie. I can't stand it. This movie drove me nuts. Where to start? A lot of people will like watch a movie and call it hipster or whatever. Like hipster is a term that's thrown a lot around a lot, and I don't even know the exact meaning of it. But if I had to say any movie was a hipster movie, it would be this fucking movie. The dialogue is so fucking pretentious in this movie. I can't stand the dialogue. The concept is I think more interesting to in theory than in practice. And when you actually start watching the movie, like the characters, I really didn't like at all. And this movie's it's fucking weird and awkward. It's like there is a scene in this movie that when I was watching it, I was embarrassed. I don't know. It's the most embarrassed I've ever been watching a movie. I genuinely felt uncomfortable. It was, I don't know. It's one of the weirdest scenes in the movie, and it was almost hard not to laugh. But it was, I don't know. Like again, this movie has like this quirkiness that just is. It's, I don't know. It's insufferable, to be honest. Like I hated the characters. I like the look of the film. It looks nice, and it's well directed, well shot. But I don't know, like the dialogue, the characters, like there's just everything about it just rubbed me the wrong way. Just not my style of movie at all. Like the whole time I was watching it, like I was just like, fuck this. Like why am I watching this? Yeah, it's out of all the movies, I think it's like number two out of all of these I've got listed here as far as movies that get highly praised that I can't stand. So yeah, I'm sorry to all the people out there that like it, but yeah, just not for me whatsoever. Next up, Paranormal Activity. Fuck this movie, man. Okay, like horror movies. I want to like horror movies. I really do, but so many of them are such shit. It really bugs me. And even the horror movies that come out that are highly praised, like Paranormal Activity or recently It Follows. Like It Follows was okay, but I mean, Paranormal Activity is such garbage. I don't understand how anyone likes this fucking movie or finds it scary. I guess I'm kind of different in that way because a lot of horror movies, I don't even find them scary. They're startling in some ways. There's a lot of jump scares, but again, you're being startled. That's not a movie being scary. A scary movie to me is one that has like just insane amounts of tension and atmosphere. To me, the best horror movie of all time is John Carpenter's The Thing. It's yet to be topped, and of course, that's the '80s when horror movies were better. Although, granted, then you had the slasher genre come in with like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and those movies I'm not that big into either. But I don't know, the horror genre is just not really my type of genre. But it can be. I think you can make a good horror movie. It's not impossible, but I mean, I don't know. I guess it's very difficult. But Paranormal Activity. Where to start with this one? The characters are fucking awful. They're terrible. They're annoying. You've got this supernatural activity going on, which I don't know how anyone finds that shit scary. Oh, a blanket is rising up, and oh, a girl's being pulled by an invisible force through a hallway. Scary. I don't know, man. It's the whole time I was watching this, I was just laughing at how stupid it was. It's the most stupid fucking movie. I don't. And then it's got a million sequels because I don't know. Somehow these movies make money. I don't know. And again, let's talk about all like these exorcism movies that come out. There's got to be like one every fucking month or two that like these exorcism movies that are just I don't get like why are exorcisms scary? I don't understand. Like even the original Exorcist, there's another movie I kind of find overrated, but that movie at least has some craftsmanship to it. But I don't know, the whole concept of exorcisms to me, like it's just such a stupid, silly concept. I don't know. I don't find it scary. But I don't know. All these horror movies that come out, like I don't even like. There's so many that just come and go. And I'm just like, I look at these commercials and I'm just like, God, like the Insidious movies, I can't stand those either. Like I don't know. Horror movies these days just nothing gets me more angry than horror movies because I don't know, man. I'm on a rant here, but yeah, Paranormal Activity and almost every horror movie that comes out these days, highly praised and not highly praised, overrated as fuck. Yeah, I said Her was like my second most overrated movie. Nah, it's Paranormal Activity. One movie though that this movie is obviously inspired by this Blair Witch Project. I actually do kind of like. I think that movie succeeds mostly due to its atmosphere because it takes place in a dark forest, and it has a hell of an ending. But even that has like a supernatural slant to it that I'm not really a fan of. But yeah, Paranormal Activity. Fuck this movie so much, man. I absolutely hate it. All right, the final movie here. It's a trilogy. I've talked about this before, and it's probably where I'm going to get the most disagreements because people love the shit out of this trilogy and director in general. Which I'll talk about that. The Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't like it. I don't get it. Uh, Why is that? I don't know. I guess a few reasons. For one, the characters. I don't like the characters. I just flat out don't like the characters. I don't think they're interesting. I think they're boring. There's like nothing to them. There's that, and it's hard to care about the trilogies a lot when you just don't like the characters. The story, like the main story with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it's so simple and basic. It's I don't know. I wish it was just I don't know. It's too simple and basic for me. Of course, you have common complaints I've heard before. In Clerks 2, there's a funny scene, where you have the Star Wars nerd and the Lord of the Rings nerd, and, just going after each other. And of course, there's the skit. The Lord of the Rings, just a bunch of walking. The first movie, a bunch of walking. The second movie, a bunch of walking. Oh, trip over a tree. Third movie, a bunch of walking. That skit, which even in the movie they explain that. Oh, you're over simple. You're being disingenuous, but just a tad. But there's a lot of walking in these fucking movies. There really is. I guess that's like the main point. Like I just find these movies really boring. And then you get to like the battle scenes, which I'll admit these Lord of the Rings movies they look great. They look fantastic. But these action scenes, I feel like there's nothing at stake in these action scenes. You hear like you have these massive armies and just constant fighting, and it's so boring. I can't care about what's happening because it's just I feel like there's nothing at stake. And again, like I said before, I don't care about the characters. Again, I think it's a little too. I don't know. Maybe this is just a personal preference thing, but I wish too like it was just darker in general. Which Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings get compared a lot, although they're actually very different. But I've said before too, like high fantasy, I'm not really into all that much, especially in movies and TV shows. And I can get by it sometimes in video games, but. And to me, Lord of the Rings is like the most generic high fantasy you can get. Like when I think of like the most generic, like typical high fantasy, I think of Lord of the Rings. And admittedly, I mean, yeah, the books are really old, and they were, I'm sure, amazing for their time. But I just in this day and age, this kind of generic high fantasy, I can't get into it. Especially when you have something like Game of Thrones, which I like it better because they dial back the high fantasy tropes. They're still there to an extent, but they're really in the background. And at the forefront, you have characters with tons of character development. You have the political intrigue, and you have just a sense of they're very dark. Like that series is very dark, and you feel like things are at stake. Characters die constantly, and things are just really depressing. And you want the good guys to win desperately because things are so depressing and horrible. And I find that way more attractive than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But yeah, other than that, like I find the dialogue to be just very boring. I don't know. It's just the series. It's just not for me. I've tried to watch this trilogy multiple times, and every time I'm so bored. I cannot get into it. And so let's talk about Peter Jackson. He's considered one of the best directors of all time. Mostly due to this trilogy, and that I don't get it. I don't fucking get it. Peter Jackson, in my opinion, is a terrible fucking director. Let's go over his films. I don't understand why people consider this guy like one of the greatest directors of all time. In fact, I think he might be maybe why I don't like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think if you gave this trilogy to someone else, I don't know who, but maybe it could have been more interesting to me. Maybe I could have gotten into it. I don't know about that because I don't know. I probably wouldn't even like the Lord of the Rings books either. Which I haven't read the books, but Peter Jackson, he started off doing really schlocky like B movie horror movies. Bad Taste was one. Dead Alive was another. And Dead Alive is like a cult hit type movie. And I watched that because I heard it was an amazing cult hit type movie. Dead Alive fucking sucks. I hate that movie. Which, okay, obviously, okay, my opinion. That is another movie where it's so boring. Like, I don't get it. It's not funny. It's just a bunch of blood and guts thrown in your face through the entire movie. And I just don't see what's so entertaining about that. Like, I remember watching that movie and I was just like, this? I mean, there's one notable scene, like, there's some gross out scenes there that are, pretty famous. I'm just like, so what? So fucking what? Like, that movie, I don't understand the praise for that movie. Bad Taste is even worse. Like, that's, like, super low budget, like, garbage. He might have done one more horror movie, but after that, he actually made a real movie, Heavenly Creatures, which is actually probably his best movie from what I've seen. That said, I still think that movie is overrated. It was highly praised. It has a haunting quality to it, but I thought it was mostly boring, honestly. The performances just didn't do anything for me, and the writing was, I think, not very good. And that's one of my main complaints of Peter Jackson. He writes a lot of his movies. He might be an okay director, but writing-wise, like, his writing is not very good. Like, honestly, I don't... Like, his writing is kind of trashy, to be honest. And Heavenly Creatures does have a really good ending. That did actually kind of stick with me. So, out of all the movies, I'll give him that. Heavenly Creatures was a decent movie. After that, I'm trying to think. The one movie I haven't seen from him is The Frighteners, which apparently is pretty good. It's one of those horror comedy movies, which I find those movies are really bad most of the time because they can't quite get the perfect balance. I've heard that's a decent, kind of underrated movie. I'll maybe give that a chance one day. But other than that, you have the Lord of the Rings movies, which again, I thought were kind of boring. King Kong, which King Kong is terrible as well. Like, that's another fucking boring movie with awful characters, awful dialogue. The original is way, way better. And so long. These movies, the King Kong and the Lord of the Rings movies are way too fucking long. Like, King Kong was like 3 hours long. Like, it was insane. Like, that, if I might like King Kong less than the Lord of the Rings movies even. Like, that, I hated that movie. And then The Lovely Bones. Not many people have seen The Lovely Bones. People just tend to forget about it when talking about Peter Jackson as one of the best directors. The Lovely Bones is, it's so bad. It's laughably bad. Like, Mark Wahlberg gives, like, one of the worst performances ever. It's so terrible. The movie is just super pretentious. The dialogue is awful. It's that movie. If you want a laughably bad movie, go watch The Lovely Bones. Like, and then what's he done? Is that all he's done? I think that's all he's done. But I mean, that's a pretty, in my opinion, a pretty shitty group of a bunch of movies, and he's considered like up there with fucking Scorsese, and even Steven Spielberg and like Kubrick and stuff. Like, come the fuck on, like. I don't know, I'm getting a bit ranty here. I apologize, especially to those that really like Peter Jackson, his movies, and The Lord of the Rings, but I don't know, for the longest time, I've just felt that he's like the most overrated director of all time. Like, no one even comes close to this guy. I just don't get it. But yeah, that's it, guys. Sorry, super negative video, but I promise the next video is going to be more positive. And again, these are just my opinions, and it's awesome if you love some of these movies. But what are some movies that you guys find overrated? Am I alone with the Lord of the Rings hate? But thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.